Hi, everybody. It's so good to see everyone. Welcome to our very first Keeping It Sacred panel. I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, and here we have an amazing interfaith group, a panel who served all together. All six of us served together at UCLA Medical Center in 2006 as a spiritual care team, our interfaith spiritual care team. We've been friends and known each other since then. It's been a while since we've each spoken to one another. So we've just reunited about a half an hour ago and are so glad to have this great energy back. Someone said it feels like we're all in our 20s again, and it definitely does. It's wonderful to be back. We thought that at this time when COVID-19 has ravaged the entire world, that it would be a really important time to come together in unity, to support one another, to talk about how it's affected our individual communities, what that's done with our theology and what texts we're relying on at this time, and what our prayers are. So I'd like to introduce our panel today. First, coming from San Bernardino, we have Father Eric Esparza. He is a Roman Catholic priest at the Diocese of San Bernardino, California. He was ordained in 2008 and now serves as the director of the Office of Priest Personnel in the Office of the Bishop, as well as the priest moderator of the Holy Name of Jesus Parish in Redlands, California. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. It's good to be here with all of you.
Coming in from Boston, we've got Reverend Rebecca Ingram. She's a Unitarian Universalist minister and a board-certified chaplain through the Association of Professional Chaplains. She served as a chaplain in healthcare, both hospice and also in the hospital settings for over 10 years. She currently serves as an interfaith chaplain at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts, with a focus on oncology, palliative care, and neonatal care. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here.
Coming in from Covina, California, we've got the Reverend Dr. Peter Tangatwe. He's the pastor of Praise Community Church in Covina, California, and he has been there for the past 5 years. He's ordained with the Presbyterian Church USA since 2008 and has previously served as hospice chaplain in South Pasadena and hospital chaplain at St. Joseph Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And we've got now our 2 Canadians. I didn't put you last on purpose. We've got from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Reverend Sheena Trotter Dennis, United Methodist. She is currently on a time of renewal and discernment. She finds her days filled with family history projects, pulpit supply preparation, and raising a 10 and a 14-year-old, and also letting the dog in and out all day long. She's served congregations in Texas, Southern California, and Calgary, Alberta. She's currently connected with Hillhurst United Church in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Good to be here with each one of you.
So good to see your faces. Good. And last, well, not last, I'll be last, but we've got Rabbi Daniel Michaelberg coming all the way from Ottawa, Canada. He's the senior rabbi of Temple Israel of Ottawa. He has previously served congregations in Toronto and Vancouver. He was ordained at the Los Angeles campus of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 2008. Rabbi Michaelberg serves as a strong progressive voice for Tikkun Olam, for social action and inclusivity. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with each of you.
And here in Laguna, California, I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, founder of the text-based community called Keeping It Sacred, which organized this panel today. I serve as the visiting rabbi at Temple Israel of Hollywood in Hollywood, California. And I'm also an author, social justice advocate, and serve on the board of the Women's Rabbinic Network. So welcome, everybody. Hello. It's so good to see all of you, all of your great energy. You've been an amazing panel already. You've gotten back in so enthusiastically. This group is a group that, for me personally, I love to just, come back to this group to kind of understand where I am in the world and where my place is. It's a great touchstone group to talk about spirituality and thoughtfulness, and that's because each one of you are so genuine and so thoughtful. So thank you so much for being here on this panel today. And our first question is, I just wanted to start off by asking you, how are you? So either in whatever way you want to talk about that, how you are, either situationally, how your communities are doing, congregationally, or in terms of the institutions you work at, or in terms of just your religious tradition, how people are and how you're dealing with that, how things are. Let's jump right in.
I can answer that. I here in Calgary, and I'm connected also with many colleagues and others in Southern California. I think the word that comes to mind is how we're reshaping and understanding community, and what that looks like. It's been interesting to be suddenly pushed onto like a virtual stage, or in virtual community with people, and how we're, as faith communities, responding to that. I think it's really amazing to see how quickly we've developed ways to connect, either on Zoom or another platform, or continuing our conversations. I know even my kids have like their Girl Guides online these days, or doing virtual camping in the backyard or whatever. But all these ways that we're still trying to keep connected to one another. I think that's super important, and probably something that's unique to each one of us and our faith communities.
Beautiful.
I can go next.
Yeah.
My ministry is kind of twofold. One is it's parish-based, but also diocesan, which is the larger area of our diocese, which encompasses Riverside and San Bernardino counties. So on the diocesan part, working with the bishop, you see the complexities of looking at the church and our response to this whole COVID-19, the daily decisions that have to be made in real time and with changing information, and what that impact is to over 1.7 million Catholics that we have in the San Bernardino Riverside counties. And so that has been a real challenge, because it's not just a decision that you make for just smaller community, which my parish community, about 3,000 families, as opposed to 1.7 million Catholics. So I've learned a lot. It's always in emergencies, you learn a lot about each other, how we respond to things. But I've seen so many, including from top down, beginning with our bishops, Bishop Barnes and Bishop Rojas, seeing their leadership come alive and in a new way, an emergency, and still trying to provide the spiritual resources to our people. And at the parish level, being able to find ways to connect. I think, as Sheena had mentioned, connection is key. That doesn't leave us because we're at home. We have to be connected, and we're looking at ways to connect that we never really did before. Or we talked about maybe live streaming our weekly masses, and we never were able to do that. Well, now we were forced into it, and people are responding very well and are appreciative, because they need that connection. We need words of inspiration. We need to know that we're not alone, because in emergencies we feel fearful and we get scared, and there's a lot of questions. And so to be able to provide some comfort to those who are at their homes, and our community has responded very well. But I've also learned that nothing is like just picking up the telephone and calling someone. I think we have lost that in our world today because of so many other technology, but that has been also a very keen way of staying connected to our parishioners. It's calling them and checking in on them, and they are very appreciative for that. So we're doing so many different things. I personally, and just seeing how the gospel is being shared, it's just amazing what people are doing, and I'm very grateful to that. So I hope we will not only learn the lessons from this time and our interconnectedness as a human family, but also our ability to share the word, God's word, with the people in so many different ways.
Thank you. The theme is...
I would echo both of those important words and add, it's so difficult to process when we're still in the midst of the fire. And we may be just 7 weeks into this new world, but it continues to be a reality that I think we're all struggling to grapple with. Mm-hmm. What I'm beginning to come to is sort of recognize that superficially things look very different. The most obvious being that we can't be with one another in a physical way, and that we can't be in our sacred spaces that I think we've all taken for granted before this. And yet we've really recognized that our values are very much consistent and haven't changed in the slightest. And in fact, we're living those values in creative and inspiring and beautiful ways. So very much this notion of being with one another. You know, if you would have shared with me 2 months ago that we could be with one another virtually, I would have said that doesn't really cut it. And yet we're really witnessing that. You know, I think this is a great example of how even the six of us, taken 14 years for us to all come together. And so we're really seeing that in creative ways, we can find that way to come together and even to pray and to have worship using tools such as Facebook. That if you would have told me 2 months ago that I would have been doing that, I would have said, not me. And yet we're really able to see how we're able to take down boundaries and borders and explore in creative ways to really live our faith and to be there for one another. Different ways that we've sort of showed our support is recognizing that there's countless people in our community who are vulnerable, and as best we can, delivering groceries, delivering medication, making sure that we have a phone tree to reach out to people, making masks. Actually, I have it right here that the quilters in our community made these masks. And I don't think in a million years they thought that they would be turning their efforts from quilting to mask making, but it's a way that we're able to come together in our community in unique and creative ways. Some of them being virtual, and some of them being the opposite of virtual, being really the labor of our hands to knit to help one another as best we can.
I'm happy to chime in now. So I'm in the hospital setting at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. And I would say there's significant distress, as I suspect most people can imagine. I kind of don't even know where to start, quite frankly, to describe it all or talk about it all. I think speaking a little bit more just from my role as an interfaith chaplain there, I think one of the hardest things is we've shifted so much of our work to telephone calls. So for instance, we're actually not allowed to go into the rooms of patients who are COVID positive. There are some chaplains who are still working on site, some who are working remotely, and some doing a combination. I'm exclusively working remotely. So I'm doing a lot of phone calls, which is something I almost never did prior to this pandemic. And so it's been a learning curve for that. I've been kind of amazed at how much support I can offer through the phone. Another added challenge is that patients aren't allowed visitors. So obviously that's a huge source of distress for everybody, for patients, for families who can't visit, for staff who are trying to provide everything and who are kind of witnessing the isolation that's happening. And that's very, very difficult, obviously. And so I think that's kind of the isolation is very difficult. And what else would I say? I think also keeping in mind that there are other people in the hospital that aren't COVID positive that are there with other issues. And so just the loneliness is pretty high. And I think also though that when people are coming together to provide support in whatever way, whether it's in person or through the phone, I've been really amazed at just how receptive people are. And so that's very encouraging, that I feel like people who need the support are kind of opening their hearts to that rather than turning away from that. And for me, I know that's been sort of inspiring, and that's been a source of hope in all this difficulty and challenge.
Beautiful.
All right.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, for me, I'll just talk about my responsibilities in the church. And, you know, it sounds similar, I guess, to what most of you have already said in terms of having myself and the congregation adjust to meeting virtually, meeting through Zoom, live streaming our services. Although in our case, it was fortunate too, because we've been live streaming for a couple of years. And for people who couldn't attend our service, mostly for members who couldn't do that. So it wasn't a difficult step in that sense. But what's keeping us busier nowadays is the fact that, we've seen, and this is probably the case with many houses of live streams, how many people view your worship. I count the numbers like these can't be our members. So it's like, wait a second, you see an opportunity there in terms of, wow, people out there, not just in my church, are in need of hearing, getting spiritual support, getting spiritual comfort. And in our case, it's about God and the Bible that we are presenting, and that's actually kept us even busier than before COVID, which should make sense, because we are in a crisis. So we've been having small group studies on Zoom, Zoom prayer meetings. We're trying to be a more praying congregation, not just for ourselves, but for others in the community, interacting more in social media, some visits, although much more limited. And it's been, as much as it's been a big adjustment for my congregation, I think it's opportunities that the church is stepping into to be more of a church that's concerned for things outside of our four walls, and instead expanding a bit more out in the world, actually into the communities. So in one sense, as much as it's unfortunate that everything is happening the way it is opening up new channels for the gospel.
Absolutely. We're all struggling we're all trying to figure out, what is the new normal, and how do we keep true to our traditions and our religious traditions in this. I think part of what's been so horrible and hard is that people haven't been able to rely on the rituals that we've created, right? Especially if you think about, we can think about, first it was the bar mitzvahs, right? A lot of the bar and bat mitzvahs had to go online, and we were trying to wonder what does that mean for a student to become of age in this age? And the Zoom bar mitzvahs were kind of a new thing. Then the wedding couples were wondering, how am I going to get married? I heard some amazing stories about some Israelis who got married in a grocery store because the grocery store was the only place that people could go in larger numbers. And so they had their wedding there. Or this couple I read about in New York, they had their wedding on the street in New York, and they went to right outside of where their officiant lived, 4 floors up, and the officiant was calling out, "Do you take her?" And they were screaming, "Yes." And they thought that nobody would be at their wedding, but really their whole block was there cheering them on out the windows. But now, of course, the funerals, and thinking about, how do we honor a person's life? How do we translate a person's life into the values that they lived in a virtual way? What does mourning look like when we have taken away the opportunity to grab a handful of earth, as we do in a Jewish funeral, and place it on the casket when it's in the grave? How do we replicate that? What's the essence of what that means? And how can we honor their lives, and how can we pay respect as a community to an individual in the absence of gathering in person? So to see the creativity of colleagues thinking about, we used to all sit around and talk about the person and share what they've meant in our lives in a living room, and now we can do that on Zoom, and now we can have Aunt Bessie across the country come in and tune in as well. It takes a real open heart to see the potential there, the opportunities there, as Peter had mentioned, the potential of reaching out beyond the walls of our homes to connect. I've been thinking a lot about the temple and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70. And when the temple was destroyed in the year 70, the rabbis had to go out, and they went to this place called Yavne, and they had to figure out, what am I going to do? How am I going to create Judaism anew in the absence of the temple and the sacrificial cult. And they had to think really creatively and figure that out for themselves. And from there, they came up with the synagogue system, with the rabbinic system, and meeting in houses of worship and study. Now I feel like we're almost at a point like that, where now that there isn't an opportunity to gather, at least in this moment, we have to figure out how are we going to distill the essence of our traditions and still bring it to the fore with all of the tools and resources that we have, which fortunately is technology. I can't imagine having this happen 10 years ago when we didn't even have this technology. So I really commend the work that each of you are doing, to think about how we can do the essential things that we've been doing, but now with the resources that we have. What I wanted to check in and ask, what texts have you been looking to? What writings, texts, what parts of your tradition are you looking to that are really as we used to say, what's keeping you strong right now? What's been keeping you there?
I think I'll go ahead and begin. For us as well with the Old Testament is the book of Psalms. As you all know, the book of Psalms has every emotion, every experience spoken, and you can turn to those words to give you words when you don't have the words. Today in our readings from our liturgy, we had Psalm 23, which is very familiar to a lot of people. And of course, the line, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we fear no evil, for you are by our side. And I think that's important because a lot of people are feeling that right now, this darkness of not knowing what life will look like and how it will be different, but yet being assured as best we can as ministers that God is with us, that God has not abandoned us in the moment of this crisis or the moment of pain, but is ever close to us like a shepherd who walks with us and leads us through all things, including the darkness that is around us at this time. So I think the book of Psalms becomes a real asset and help to all of us during these times. It's something that we would all, collectively share in as a group to turn to those as a form of inspiration.
And especially, Eric, at the end of that psalm, right, it says, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, right? Thinking about what does it mean to create community now from within our homes. Like, we don't have to go to a synagogue or church or mosque anymore to go find God. God is within us. God is dwelling in our homes. Now, to feel that closeness, to struggle to feel that closeness of God with us, and God dwelling in our house, and us dwelling in God's house. I mean, that's a beautiful piece of that text as well. Absolutely. What's also keeping people strong?
I've been thinking a lot, in my tradition, there's, hang on, I just pulled it up. We have 7 principles that are sort of our values, and they sort of serve as moral guides for Unitarian Universalists. And the 7th principle, I'll just read it. It says that we promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And it's interesting because in our communities, we often reference that in kind of connection to environmental justice and environmental work. And I've actually been thinking about it a lot in this context of the pandemic. I mean, I think there are environmental components to that too, certainly, but it's not one that I would have thought of in kind of like a healthcare crisis that would be coming to me so frequently. And I think that, as well as the masks that we're all wearing, and that's kind of like an image that I'm holding alongside that principle, the 7th principle of our interconnectedness. And I think I'm really struck by how profound it is, and sort of that tension of how much we are kind of dependent on each other for our well-being, especially our spiritual well-being, and remaining connected and in community and supporting one another, and yet kind of the fear of being with people too, and sort of walking and keeping, I was just out for a walk earlier today, and how you have to keep a distance. So, we're literally encouraged to stay away from people. And I just think that's a pretty profound and intense juxtaposition and tension that we're holding. But I also find it beautiful in the sense that we really, I think, it's so obvious how much we are connected and how what I do affects somebody else. I saw a video explaining sort of the importance of wearing the mask, and how I wear a mask to protect you and you wear it to protect me. And again, that kind of speaks to like how important that mask is, that it's really kind of more to protect the other person, more so than protecting ourselves, but how we're, I think, all taking that up and committed to that, and how beautiful that is. And it only works if you have everyone doing that. And so that in a way connects us in a way beyond faith and that I've never seen before. So I think it's a pretty powerful image, the mask.
In our Christian tradition, it's the season of Easter still. And so it's the season that we look for signs of hope and new life and hear those stories. And so for me, it's sort of apropos when all seems lost or gone or unusual or different, that we can still see signs of hope in our world. And so, just taking a walk that many of us are doing, seeing signs, on the sidewalk kids have drawn, or signs in people's windows, or I don't know, a smile with your eyes while you're wearing a mask, or in whatever way that we're seeing hopeful things in the world, or even just reading articles about people trying to come up with vaccines, or hopeful things that way, or finding ways to connect with one another. That gives me energy in this time, and I think it does others. Another person that I've recently been engaged with is a church historian, actually, from Duke, and her name is Kate Bowler, and she is a younger woman who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer a few years ago, and she wrote a book that is titled Everything Happens, and she has a daily vlog, and I like to listen to her stuff because it's quite excellent. So I'll leave that to you.
So similar, I recognize that each of us have our everyday challenges and opportunities, and then we have our holy days. So for in the Jewish faith, we've been very soon after all these restrictions were placed upon us, Passover came. Passover, the holiday that's traditionally celebrated in the home, and suddenly we weren't able to gather in the ways that we had really been accustomed to, and yet again we creatively found ways to connect, and it's really the Passover story that gives me strength. And I found particularly this year the Passover message really resonating, that being that once we were slaves and now we are free. And we talk about at the Seder table, as we gather with our loved ones, that we tell this same story from year to year because it's a living story, and in many ways we're consistently enslaved, and we have to continue to walk that path of freedom. I don't think any of us are going to forget the pandemic of 2020 and how it enslaved us in countless ways, and how we emerged with strength, and how we connected to our faith, and how we discovered community, and how we were able to emerge in a place of strength. And so certainly as I told the Passover story this year, and as I hold it close to my heart, I value that even as we're presently in a place of desperation and vulnerability, but we're directing ourselves towards a destination of promise, and holding that hope is really core to finding our way forward.
I think even after that, if I could just dovetail on that, I mean, just even after that, in terms of, on the second night of Passover, then we start counting the Omer. We get into this spiritual space where we're counting every single day for 7 weeks of 7 days until we get to Shavuot. And Shavuot's the holiday where we get the Torah. So the Jewish tradition recognizes that there's a place that you go from between being enslaved to being free. And then the next point of contact is to think about how you want to live your life, how you want to live as a community by getting the Torah, getting the laws that will teach us how to live in community in a better way. And I think that we're kind of on that path of figuring out, what is going to be the new normal? What is the new normal? How do we relate to each other in this new normal, right? Yes, we have to wear masks and we can't see each other's smiles, but, right, did you see someone just started printing smiles on their masks, right? Or I saw someone else, my mom kept saying, like, why don't you just put like a clear piece of plastic where your mouth is so people can see you smile, when you walk by, or other things like that. Or, when they're behind the mask, put a little picture of your ID here with your face there so people know who the doctor is, who's caring for them. So I think we're all trying to figure out what that new normal is, and we're kind of coming up with this new law or this new set of customs that we can use to live in the world. I think it's so exciting to be part of that group of people who's really trying to figure out what the new normal can be. Peter? Okay.
I was going back to your original question about scriptures. Yeah. At least for my church, this scripture has come up a few times. Philippians 4 verse 6 in the New Testament. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. We have other verses too, but that one's come up a few times. So when you asked about scriptures, that's the first thing I thought of. And it's fitting because we do get a sense about how anxious people are nowadays, especially at the beginning with all the hoarding and all those other things that are going on, because you don't know what's going on, you know what's going to happen, and for that, our church also, at least since the beginning, we've been having people do devotionals every day. We've asked people from our church, we've asked people from other churches, and nowadays it's mostly me going on Facebook Live every 5 p.m. During weekdays, just to give a word of encouragement and maybe talk about some spiritual topics and some spiritual practices. So in that sense, those, I think, aid in helping us keep strong or keep our strength in this time. So it's like you can be physically in your home, but your spirit kind of yearns to do something and get out there, and other than grocery shop, in a sense, be an encouragement to one another. So I think that's where we're at.
Especially with those who are so isolated, I think, that's what the service you're providing to them, to be able to connect and to connect in social ways as well. And not have a one-way kind of a broadcast where, you just share the service, but now you're engaging people and interacting. And what a wonderful invitation that is, Peter.
Yeah, with our small groups, that's what we're emphasizing every week too, because we've been, we may not gather as a big group, but it's been meaningful because that's our church used to be not a small group church, but now we are.
There's also there's a Jewish text that says, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od ve'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. So it means the whole world is a narrow bridge, but the point is not to be afraid. So that idea also of just keep putting one foot in front of the other, getting to that other side, whenever the other side is. Eric, I've been thinking a lot about you because when we were all chaplains, I remember when we each served overnight shifts, we got the talk. We heard, those of us who aren't Catholic, we heard how important it is to have the last rites and to have them delivered in person and to kind of administer a protocol. And I know that we all wanted to make sure that we could have a priest on call and call them as soon as we could to make sure that someone could be there for our patients. And if not, we had the question of would we help help administer them. And so I've been thinking a lot about you because of some of the things that Rebecca has been mentioning around, not being able to be there by the sides of COVID patients as spiritual care providers. So it's a question specifically for Eric, but I think for all of us about, how you as a clergy person have kind of been navigating not being able to be there for people, but then also practically speaking with some of the rites that really need to be done in person. How has it specifically, the Catholic Church been figuring out how to administer such critical rites?
Yeah, for sure. The great challenge has been contact, and especially being very ritualistic. You spoke, Rabbi Heather, about the need for ritual, and we very much are part of that. And 7 sacraments of our church tradition are very important, and one of those is the anointing for the sick and dying. And how do we do that in a COVID-19 situation? We've done our best to try to be as available for those emergency situations. Kind of the normal, kind of sick, I would like this. We've tried to limit that through phone calls and praying over the phone or praying over some of the platforms. But we've tried to the best of our ability to where we can, because sometimes it's outside of our control. Meaning the hospital might not allow us to come in, even as clergy. Some still do, some wouldn't. And so how do you bring comfort to someone who's dying, and also to their family members? You spoke earlier about funerals and all that. It's already difficult enough when we have to experience the death of a loved one, and how do you do that now in isolation, where you can't gather, where you're so used to a hug being as meaningful as so many other things that we could do. And for us, a big part of the sacraments is touch, the laying on of hands, the contact. So it's been a real transition. We've tried to maintain it for those who are seriously ill and dying to the best of our ability, but even then we've been prevented. And it's been a real challenge, because some really count on that in those moments and look for it, either for themselves personally or a family member who wants that for their loved ones. And so we've just, it's a case-by-case situation that we do what we can in that moment. And I know one of our chaplains couldn't get into one of the convalescent facilities, so he worked it out with a nurse, and a nurse took the iPad, and he did kind of a FaceTime prayer service with all of them. Certainly not the sacrament, but still the best that we have to do what we can in those moments when we're prevented for whatever reason, that is there. And so we've been attempting to do that. And I think people will see when you make attempts, even if it's not what they are really looking for, by you meeting them, they acknowledge that, and it brings them comfort, knowing that they don't have to go through that themselves, or a family member didn't have to go through that completely by themselves. Other places we've had, we'd be on that we could get into the hospital, but couldn't get into the room, and maybe there's a glass door, some type of speaker, so that the person could hear the voice of the priest and see them if they needed, but nevertheless wasn't in contact. So it's been a real challenge, but we're, as I'm sure all of you are with everything else, we have to bring the church, or bring our tradition, to where we can, and with the time and ways that we can at the moment. And then it will help us to look and reevaluate moving forward, how might we do this better in the future. And I know, like for us, Pope Francis has really spoken about a church that goes out. Well, here we are. And we've had to do that in ways that we weren't quite maybe accustomed to. And it's been a challenge, but I've seen some blessings. But nevertheless, it's been hard on our people, because they count on the sacraments to give them grace and solace in time of need.
I've been incredibly impressed with the Archdiocese in Boston. So, Beth Israel, the hospital where I'm at, doesn't allow any, chaplains to go and be at the bedside, and they're really limiting how many people are going in to be with COVID patients for understandable reasons. But the diocese has now put together a small group of priests that have volunteered to exclusively anoint COVID positive patients. And so that has started actually this past week, and they have separate housing now for them. And again, that is all that they are doing. And the hospital where I'm at has agreed to let them come in and do that. And I think in Boston, there's a number of large hospitals all in very close proximity to each other. So these priests are kind of serving all the sacramental needs or the anointing of the sick needs in those hospitals. And the chaplains who are on site at the hospital are serving as escorts to them. So helping, greeting them at the door and bringing them up to the room and helping them don, and doff properly and safely. And so we've been able to provide that, which I think is extraordinary. And it's just been really wonderful. I coordinated that. Actually, Friday evening, there was a need for Sacrament of the Sick, and we were able to coordinate that with the nursing staff, security, me on the phone doing this remotely, and then the priest who was, has volunteered to provide this support, which again is incredible. So it's been amazing to see people come together and creatively and to try to do as much as possible in the safest way possible.
What a creative solution. Wow. That's so amazing, Rebecca. I'm so glad that you did that and worked with them to do that. That's so meaningful for people. I can only imagine. Wow. Well, we have some questions from some people who've written in, and I'd like to ask you some questions. Would anyone like to share anything else about COVID specifically and how that's kind of impacted you first before we kind of turn to some of these other questions that aren't necessarily COVID specific? Okay, so the question is, how can we as a united community best work together to fight the terrifying racism that is currently dominating our lives? I'm not sure, but I think that this person was talking about the racism that has been escalating. I think initially we know that Asian Americans started being targeted on subways, like in New York and other places, and San Francisco, and beaten up. We know that the hate has kind of been on the rise. So it says, how can we as a united community best work together to fight this kind of terrifying racism?
One of the things I've been really touched by is witnessing the kindness and witnessing the love that is truly present for everybody, and especially the stranger in this time. I'm often touched as I try to go for walks, and whoever I walk by, we nod and we smile, and more often than not, I don't know who that person is, and I would not have done that 7 weeks ago. So I think there's a real sense in the world that we're all in this together and that we're all struggling. And I would certainly say at our present times, we spend too much time putting up walls. And one of the things that we're really learning from this is we need to take those walls down to find ways to support one another and build each other up. We're all in incredible pain at this time, and we're only going to come through this as we focus our energies on acts of loving kindness, on generosity, on recognizing that it's the love and blessing that we can exhibit, and that's something that we all share. So to emphasize that and to really recognize the importance of that is something that I'm cherishing, and I hope and pray we continue to hold close to as we walk the path of healing.
I think along with that is also like for our religious communities to really name what's going on and to like identify it and to speak out against any form of racism or injustice in whatever form it shows up, and to look at ourselves and our participation in that, and collectively speak out against it.
We each have a critical role.
We do. I think it's really challenging us to look at what the definition really of love is. In our world today, that word love, depending on who's speaking about it at any given time, it can have multiple meanings. And for us in the Christian tradition, truly love is sacrificial, and it's love of neighbor as that flows from our love of God. And that's why racism should play no role in who we are. But in our weakness and our sinfulness, we can resort back to those areas. Maybe they're some form of comfort for us, or some type of barrier to keep a distance, or whatever it might be. And we have to fight that constantly. And it is important for us as religious leaders to speak up against it. And I know it's not always easy to address the injustices of our world and how that will be perceived. But I was reflecting a few weeks ago when I had done one of our live stream masses. We talk about the importance of life and relationships, and how we've in essence stopped so much of our lives at this time to deal with COVID-19. But maybe coming out of this, we have to have moments where maybe it's not like everything shuts down like this time, but where we stop and say, wait, what's happening here? Look at the injustices happening here with this group or that group. And why are we saying that's okay? Or why are we not addressing it? Why are we just going on like nothing's happening? How do we defend and protect all of human life as sacred? And how do we express love from our traditions and in our words and in our actions? And I think at the beginning of all this, I think, again, crisis, defines a lot of who we are at times. But it's also that we're just overwhelmed and we might just go to the survival mode. But as time has gone on, how deep down inside that compassion and that kindness is in all of us, and that goodness, but sometimes it gets layered upon stereotypes and biases and fear and all these other things. So we begin peeling back those layers, we can get to the core of the goodness of who we are, being created in the image and likeness of God, and how we can then say, what am I doing here? And that's why people are responding in so many wonderful ways and reaching out to the needs of others in ways that they didn't think that they were, a couple months ago, but are doing it. Those who are risking their life to make sure that the homeless have food, because a lot of those normal institutions aren't doing it. I've seen some of our parishioners just show up with food and drop it off, or those who are there actually serving. Or when we put out a call for clothing because there was some needs, that the amount of clothes that people would just drop off to help those who are in need. So as you peel back those layers that are there, that sometimes blind us and create this distance, we see the goodness of who we are as humanity. And we can't forget that moving forward, because we've tended to forget that quite a bit. And we just deal with what we don't like about the other, or what we presume or assume about the other, as opposed to just first seeing the person or the individual as a person created in the image and likeness of God. As we know in our group or our circle here and working together, we know that our theologies, there's different ways we look at things, but how we can do so much good by doing what unites us first and foremost. We can have those discussions that are complex and deep in thought and theological, and there's a place for all that, but there's never a place for I have this hate because you're different. It's respect, and it's love, and love is sacrificial, giving up of something, and that's what's hard, because we want control. We all want control, and when we're forced out of that, that's why it throws us for a loop. But if we stay to the core of who we are, it will lead us through these dark times.
I think one thing that's important is that even though I think many of us are fairly isolated, I think it's important to kind of stay engaged in terms of how this pandemic is impacting communities of color and people of color, and how I think, my hope is that how I think some of the systemic racism is really kind of being brought out into the light a little bit more in some settings, especially, access to healthcare, and the economic sort of impact that this is having on essential workers who are often people of color, for us to kind of stay informed about that. And I think that even though we might be kind of staying in our homes mostly, there's still a lot that we can do. I've heard nurses say, don't donate these lunches to me. There's other people that need this, that don't have a job. They need this lunch more than I do. I've heard people suggest, supporting communities or businesses that are owned by people that have been, are at high risk, obviously, in a number of ways. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can do, even though we might initially feel helpless. So I think sort of staying engaged and staying aware and kind of constantly asking ourselves, what are sort of the implications here, and what can I be learning about the systemic racism in our country through this horrible pandemic, and how can we be responding, and what are the ways that we can unite in creative ways and in ways that we've never done before to kind of address these things that are being really magnified right now. I mean, as horrible as it is to see these injustices, I think you have to see them before you can do anything about them. Sort of my hope is that this can serve as sort of a call to action moving forward.
Absolutely. Wow. Beautiful. So we have a question from a doctor, actually. So since we were all chaplains together in the hospital, Rebecca still is, but I wanted to ask this question from the doctor, and it's a pretty complex question, so here goes. What is the soul without memory? That is, memory lives in our physical bodies, our brains, but when our brains deteriorate, so do our memories. But our memories and life experiences shape who we are. So what is the soul separate from this type of identity and any memory of all we have learned during our lives on earth? I can only imagine as a doctor, seeing so much death, being so up close to really including these big issues. So would anyone like to kind of respond to someone who's asking, what is the soul without memory, if that's really the heart of what makes us individual?
I don't know. My initial reaction to it, maybe I would think differently if, I don't know. I don't think I would think differently if I had more time, but it might be more thought out. My initial reaction to the question is that we get our worth just by that we are, right? That we are created and loved. Whether or not our brain is completely intact, or if we are completely healthy, or if we, no matter what, right? Who we are loved and cared for, and created, and we are, and that's enough.
My first response to the question is, as I think about matters of the soul, it's really matters of making meaning. And I've been hearing lots of comments about how every day looks the same and how things can be frustrating because they become almost monotonous. And my response to that is certainly, as I think about our call to community and our responsibilities to faith, is that we make meaning. And that even as one day the next is very similar in recent days, we can respond with a whole heart to make sure that we foster blessing. As you talk about memory, what that makes me think about is I have a little 2-year-old at home, and my guess is he's going to remember very little about the time period when he was home with his 2 dads around the clock. And yet I do hope that he remembers that this was a time where we came together as one, and how we promised one another that we would stick together to make sure that we respond with strength and with courage. And so as I think about this question of really remembering that which matters most, my attention is focused on how do we make sure to be there for one another, and to surround ourselves with a blessing and make sure that our values are pure.
When it comes to questions of illness and suffering especially, there's a lot of answers we seek and we don't always get. And maybe even if we were to be able to receive the answer to those complex questions, it wouldn't be good enough for us in the here and now. And so sometimes it's just sitting and listening to people in that, and being able to share with them those insights that I hear from you, my fellow workers in the vineyard, and the work that we do. I know at times we want to be able to have a clear-cut answer about all things, and yet, how do we sit with people in that pain and in those questions of life, and do our best to give some voice to it, but ultimately knowing at the very end that there's not going to be one clean-cut answer that will give us all peace that we need, especially when we're going through that or we're seeing that right before our eyes. That's why I go back to that question of suffering, because people ask that all the time. Why do good people suffer? Why is there suffering in the world? If there's a loving God, why do we see all these things happening? And even when you try to give some voice to it, it will never be complete, because it's difficult to enter completely into someone else's pain that they're going through when they ask those questions, or the struggles that they're really dealing with at that moment. But to be present, I think, does a lot, and engaging, not just casting it aside and not giving an easy answer, but walking with people, accompanying them as we ask the questions of life.
I love this question, and I'm such a chaplain, because I was the person asking that question was here right now, and I could engage a little bit more on kind of what that person's understanding of the soul is. And in my tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on each person's own spiritual journey and kind of their own understanding of their faith, and not so much kind of teaching or saying that it is one particular thing, but really engaging in exploring these concepts. So this is also, very much a Unitarian Universalist response that I'm going to give. But I think one thing I find very meaningful when I think about memories, and when I think about people whose memory is impaired for a number of different reasons, whether that's permanent or temporary, I think that the people who remain, in terms of having memories of that person, I think they take on something. I think there's a sacred sort of connection that happens when someone loses their memory, but a loved one still maintains those memories kind of for them in a way. And in that sense, if someone passes on, I feel like it's very beautiful and sacred how for me, I think the soul in a way is eternal, because it is preserved in the memories that remain in those who are living from generation to generation. And in that way, I view kind of storytelling and memory sharing as incredibly sacred and important. And I find comfort thinking that if my memory were ever impaired at any point or after I die, that that my soul in a way is preserved and carried on, and it's beyond me, right? But I entrust that to everyone who's known me and cared about me, and so I find meaning in that way.
Thank you for that answer. I know that we have someone who needs to go pretty quickly, but I just wanted to ask the last question, which is what's really, and this has been so fabulous to meet with all of you and to hear your thoughts on our situation right now. But the last question I wanted to ask, we always like to end with an uplift. So what is lifting you up at this time? This is called a nechemta. We end with positivity in the Jewish tradition. So what's kind of lifting you up, and what's been kind of inspiring you as a quick go around? I mean, I can start. I can say that, just being able to connect with so many people. I know that I've had various groups that I'm part of hold these Zoom sessions. And for Passover, for example, we had like 80 people on the Seder that I was leading for, who has an 80-person Seder except in a congregational setting. And people were coming in from Argentina, from New York, from all over the country. Just now we have 2 Canadians, we've got 4 Americans here. And, just the ability for us to transcend geography has been really exciting for me and really uplifting to kind of get out of the box that we are living in and be here with each other. So I want to thank you all for being here together as well and being a big part of that uplift. What's lifting up others?
The other day sorry, go ahead, Sheena.
No, go for it.
as I say, so when the weather's nice, I try as much as possible to get outside with my family, especially my 5-year-old son. And he has this wonderful routine of kind of running in our yard in circles with his arms out like an airplane, and wanting me to join with him. And I have to say, it's like it become a spiritual practice, and it just feels, it's just very uplifting, and I feel very grounded just outside with the sun on my face and just being childlike with my own child. And then, so I try to be mindful really whenever we have that moment together and just really appreciate it. But then a couple days after I was noticing this was becoming a routine, I read an article, and the person, I actually now forget the article, but referenced Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century Christian mystic. And I love this quote. It says that we need to fly with 2 wings of awareness. The one wing is an awareness of life's glory and beauty, and the other is an awareness of life's pain and suffering. If we try to fly with only one of these, we will be like an eagle trying to fly with only one wing. So I think I've been trying to kind of balance in my life all the pain and suffering that I'm witnessing in the hospital and from this illness with all those moments of real beauty and joy, like running around in the yard with my arms outstretched with my son and going on walks, and just really trying to treasure those I think beautiful moments in just our daily life.
Tina.
That is so beautiful. I love that image. Thank you for giving us those 2 things that we're holding, right? And that I'm sure there's more things that we're holding. It doesn't have to be that dualistic, but I love that tension that's there. But I think for me it's similar, because I was going to say like the creativity that's in the world. And to me, like creativity is new life and new things. And when we're surrounded by all this stuff that seems really dreadful, it is really dreadful and horrific, and bad news after bad news, like death counts every day, whatever it is, that it's nice to see that people are creating even in the midst of it.
And to echo those words, I've been looking to music as something that really ties us together, and is able to lift our spirits up. And whether that's liturgical music, but just as important, whether that's everyday secular music, I think there's a real potential there to help us in our harder moments find, or at least aspire for, a sense of peace.
I think for me, it's just seeing, again, it had been mentioned earlier about the interconnectedness of us all, how something could happen at one time in one place and the impact it happens. In this case, we were looking at it from a negative sense, but it goes the other way as well. And I'm beginning to see that and how we take that personal responsibility. I know right now people are a little getting like, I want to get out and I want to go back, but the fact that so many people responded by staying home when things first happened, and had that real respect for life and the sacredness of life and our responsibility to one another. And now people are looking for ways to be able to, how can I reach out? How can I take care of someone else in the midst of this time, in the midst of this situation? And I hope we never lose that. Again, the world puts so much focus on what separates us that we need to spend more time on what connects us. And this has shown that we are interconnected as one human family, whether we don't believe it or not, or whether we put barriers there in place or look at the other as someone, against me, or that we are interconnected. So why not use it for the good and the positive, and how we make decisions and how we impact people's lives. So I'm very grateful to be able to see that, because I do see the creative work of the Holy Spirit always in our midst at all times, but I think really comes to fruit in moments of great pain and sorrow. New life takes place. And as Sheena mentioned earlier, for us as Christians, being in this Easter season, how we went for us in the Catholic tradition, from Lent, which is a season of penance and giving up and making sacrifices, to the season of new life and the resurrection, and how this plays a role in our world today, where we go through this period of struggle and difficulty and sacrifice, but then there's goodness that flows from it. Despite the fact that passion and death still took place, there's new life that comes for us, and we have to always hold on to that, and that's what fills our lives with hope.
Just quickly for me, because I know we don't have time. Just in general, God being able to find the time to sit still, unlike before, when things are just, you're thinking about so many different things. But now there's at least a measure of time to really sit still with God and find some comfort and care directly, and as well as finding that people are realizing that the church is not a building, but it's actually the people. And for me, this lifts me in the sense of, oh, great, now we can actually go out there and actually be the church instead of being just in the building, and actually do good for our community. So I think that lifts me up in that sense.
And speaking of new life, lifting up and being together.
Yeah.
Being introduced to Rebecca Ingram's child. It's so wonderful to see you.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll say hello and a thank you all for being on this call, for really uniting together as one group, diverse spirits united, as we call this panel, to just check in with one another, to record this conversation so that people who might want to hear a take on a religious leader and or religious leaders of other faiths understand that we really are all working out some of these same questions together, and doing so with intention and with great spirit and innovation, and with at the root of it love, and being able to work together to do this. So thank you all for your friendship, for being great colleagues, for your wisdom and wonderful nature. And I thank you all for tuning in, whoever's listening to this recording. Thank you all. We wish you much strength at this time, much comfort, courage. We wish you healing if you're ill, and either spiritually or physically ill. And we wish that you all take good care of yourselves and one another. Thank you all for keeping it sacred, as I like to say. Thank you all.
And thank you to you,
Thank you.
Rabbi Heather, for
Thank
putting this all on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
hugs to everybody.
Yeah.
14 years too long that we haven't seen each other, so it's good to be in one setting again.